I raised a child for 2 years, thinking he was mine, then I found out he's the result of my husband's affair with my surrogate friend. Now I'm considering giving up my parental rights. I never imagined it would end like this. I never imagined it would unravel so completely. All my life, I wanted to be a mother. I tried, I fought, I bent the world to my will to make it happen. Yet here I am, standing at the edge of a life I can barely recognize, grasping for some kind of control that's long slipped from my hands. I thought I was finally living the dream, a beautiful baby boy, my son, brought into the world by the woman I considered a sister. My best friend, who gave so much of herself so I could have the family I'd always wanted. We'd been through so much together, and I thought our bond was unbreakable. My husband, my partner in all of this, stood beside me. Together, we were going to make it work. We were going to raise this child with love and care, no matter what. But no one tells you how fragile your world becomes when everything you've built is founded on lies. No one tells you that the moment you think you're holding something beautiful in your hands, it could slip away and leave you holding only shards of a dream. The blood test was supposed to be a routine checkup. That's what I told myself as I waited for the results, thinking it was nothing more than a formality. When the doctor read me the numbers, I almost couldn't hear her. Blood type B+, my son's blood type. I'm A+, my husband's O+. It didn't make sense. But I told myself it was just a mistake, a mix-up in the lab. That's what I told myself until the DNA test came back. I wasn't his mother. My husband, my best friend, together, they'd made a choice that shattered everything I thought I knew. Everything I thought we had. And now, the child I thought I'd raised for 2 years wasn't even mine to claim. I remember the moment I found out as if it happened just yesterday, even though it's been weeks. My world tilted, just like that, on its axis. A mother's instinct is supposed to be this guiding force, right? That undeniable pull that makes you bond with your child in ways no one can explain. I thought I had that. Hell, I knew I had that. I spent sleepless nights rocking him, feeding him, comforting him when the world felt too loud. I kissed his tiny hands, held his fragile heart in my arms as if it were the most sacred thing in the world. And now I was supposed to believe that he wasn't mine. It was one thing to know that I couldn't carry him, that I was never going to feel him kick or grow beneath my ribs, but it was another to learn that the child I had loved and cared for was not mine in the most fundamental way possible. Not in blood, not in any way that biology could explain. I had been deceived by the one person I trusted to keep me grounded, my best friend. My surrogate. How did this happen? I couldn't breathe for a long time. I sat in the sterile doctor's office, clutching the paper in my hand, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. The doctor's voice faded into background noise, a distant hum. All I could think was, how could he? When I called my husband to confront him, his voice trembled. It was as if he already knew. He knew what I'd found out, but he couldn't bring himself to tell me. He confessed, stumbling over his words, explaining that it had been a mistake. That it wasn't something he'd planned, that it didn't even matter because the child was still ours, that we were a family. But all I heard was the truth, a cold, ugly truth that shattered everything I'd ever known about love, trust, and family. He'd slept with her. My best friend, the woman who'd helped us have a child, the one I had leaned on for emotional support during those painful years of infertility. And not once, but several times, during the IVF process. He'd claimed it was an accident, that it wasn't intentional, that it meant nothing. Nothing. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know if I was supposed to scream, cry, or leave. All I could do was sit there, feeling the weight of his betrayal suffocating me, and watch as the man I had once loved became a stranger before my very eyes. I left that day. I didn't care where I went, just away. I didn't even say goodbye to him or our son. It felt like I was in some kind of twisted nightmare, where the only way out was to escape and not look back. I ended up at a hotel, pacing, trying to make sense of all the emotions storming inside me. But how do you make sense of something this big? Something that leaves you questioning your very worth. My mind screamed at me to go back, to talk it through, but my heart, my gut, was telling me to run. I spent that week at the hotel, curled up in bed, crying until I thought I'd run out of tears. I couldn't talk to anyone. My parents, my friends, they all had their opinions. Some tried to tell me it wasn't the kid's fault, that the child needed love, that I couldn't just walk away. But how could I look at that child, my son, knowing what I now knew? Every time I saw his face, I'd see the betrayal. Every time I held him, I'd feel the ghost of my best friend's kiss on my husband's lips. How could I raise him when all I could think about was her? My heart ached for him, but I didn't know if I was strong enough to give him what he deserved. And then there was the other side of it, The part of me that wanted to just walk away and start over. My heart burned with a desire for a clean slate. A fresh start. I had tried so hard to have the life I wanted. All I wanted was a child of my own, to love, to care for. But everything had been so wrong from the start, and now I felt like I was holding the shattered pieces of a life that could never be whole again. I called a lawyer the next day. The weight of my decisions felt unbearable, but I knew I couldn't live in this twisted version of a family. I couldn't stay in a marriage where my husband had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And I couldn't raise a child who wasn't mine, who was biologically linked to my best friend, the woman who'd torn my world apart. It wasn't a decision I took lightly, but I was done. I had been betrayed by the two people I trusted most in this world. What was left for me? A child I didn't create, a marriage that was nothing but a lie? When I told my parents, they were furious. They couldn't understand why I would walk away from the child I had raised. They said blood didn't matter. That family wasn't about biology. And I wanted so badly to believe them. But all I could think of was her face, the one that had smiled at me through every step of this journey, the one that had given me hope and then stolen everything from me. I knew they meant well. But they weren't in my shoes. They hadn't been through the years of pain, the desperate attempts to have a child. They didn't know what it felt like to have that child suddenly ripped away from you, not just in body, but in spirit. But then I talked to some of my other friends, the ones who weren't afraid to speak the truth, no matter how harsh. Some of them understood why I couldn't stay, and they told me that my decision to walk away was the only thing that would protect me from a lifetime of resentment and regret. They told me that I deserved better than this life, that I didn't need to raise someone else's child to prove that I could be a good mother. But there were those who called me heartless, immature, selfish. How could I walk away from the child I had raised? They couldn't understand. They didn't get that my love for him was tangled with 1,000 other emotions, rage, grief, and a deep, hollow betrayal that I couldn't shake. How could I live every day looking at that child and knowing he wasn't really mine? It wasn't just about blood, it was about trust. About family. About the foundation I thought I had built, only to watch it crumble in the worst way possible. I kept thinking about what it would be like to start over. To leave, to go somewhere far away, and leave this all behind. My lawyer was already helping me work through the logistics of the divorce and giving up my parental rights. It was a strange kind of freedom to think about, the idea of walking away from everything and moving on. But it was also terrifying. What would I become without my son? Without my marriage? I had spent my whole life chasing this dream of motherhood, and now that I had it, it had been taken away in the worst possible way. My heart ached, but there was a part of me that was angry too. Angry at myself for not seeing the signs, angry at him for betraying me, and angry at her for pretending to be something she wasn't. I could barely sleep at night, my mind racing with thoughts of the future. The one thing that kept me going was the idea of freedom. The idea that, one day, I could heal from this, if I left everything behind. The days after I left felt like a blur. Time lost its shape. Each day was a small eternity, filled with grief and frustration, but also something else, something that I couldn't quite name. There was a strange sense of relief too. The weight of pretending, of holding on to a life that wasn't really mine, had lifted just enough to allow me to breathe. But then the guilt would hit. Like a wave crashing over me when I least expected it. I'd wonder if I was doing the right thing. Was I really giving up on him? On my son? Was it his fault that I found out the truth? Was it fair to walk away from the one person who needed me most? The nights were the hardest. I could still hear his cries in my mind, feel the soft weight of his body resting in my arms. I'd dreamed of holding my own child for so long, and now I was haunted by the ghost of that dream. My body yearned to go back, to undo everything that had happened, to go back to the time before I knew the truth. But it wasn't possible. He wasn't mine, and I was struggling to come to terms with that. I had a conversation with my lawyer, the one who'd helped me start the process of divorce. I told him everything, how I felt like I was being forced into a corner, how I wasn't sure if I should just leave or if I should fight for my parental rights, no matter how complicated that might be. He listened, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, measured. You have to ask yourself what's best for you. Not what's best for your husband, not what's best for the child, but what's best for you in the long run. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. You've been through something unimaginable, and it's okay to protect yourself from the pain. It's okay to prioritize your healing. Those words stuck with me. I'd spent so long worrying about everyone else, the child, my husband, my friends, that I'd neglected myself. I hadn't even thought about what I needed to heal. Maybe it wasn't the child's fault that I felt so betrayed. Maybe it wasn't even my husband's fault anymore, He'd made a mistake, but it was the deceit that had broken me. But I needed to heal. I needed to rebuild myself from the ground up. There were moments, though, when I questioned everything. Was this really the right decision? I'd hear his little voice in my head. I could see his smile, his bright eyes, the way he clung to me when he was scared. I couldn't shake the feeling that by walking away, I was throwing away everything I'd worked for. Hadn't I raised him? Didn't that count for something? But no matter how much I tried to make myself believe that love could replace biology, I knew deep down that there was a part of me that couldn't forget. A part of me that would always see him as a reminder of the betrayal. The worst part was that I felt like I was losing everything at once. My family. My marriage. My identity as a mother, and all I had in return was a decision that felt like it would haunt me forever. Even if I walked away, even if I found peace somewhere else, I'd never get rid of the echo of this pain. It would follow me wherever I went. I woke up one morning with a decision in my heart. It was one of those rare moments when everything seemed to fall into place, when I could see the clarity in the fog of my emotions. I realized I wasn't walking away from motherhood. I wasn't walking away from being a mother. What I was walking away from was the illusion of control. The idea that I could fix everything, that I could make things right by holding on to a life that was built on lies. I needed to make space for something real. Something that wasn't clouded by betrayal. Maybe that meant walking away from my son, for now. But it also meant making room in my heart to heal. To rediscover who I was without the weight of this constant grief hanging over me. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. I want to move forward, I said. I want to file for the divorce, but I also want to finalize the legal process. I'm not fighting for parental rights anymore. There was no turning back. But as I hung up the phone, something strange happened. I didn't feel relief exactly, but I did feel lighter. Like I had taken the first step toward being me again, without the chains of guilt, grief, and betrayal dragging me down. It's been a few months now, and I'm settling into my new life. I found a small apartment in a city far away, a place where I could breathe without constantly thinking of what I'd lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And it was quiet. Peaceful. I'd started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me work through the pain. There were still days when the grief would hit, but they weren't as frequent. I was starting to rebuild, piece by piece. I haven't heard much from my ex or from my friend the surrogate. My son is now with her, and though I haven't seen him since I left, I know he's being loved and cared for. I hope he'll grow up to understand that the love I had for him was never fake. It just couldn't survive the betrayal. And maybe one day, I'll find the courage to tell him that. For now though, I'm learning to live for me. To forgive myself for the decisions I had to make, and to move forward with a clearer heart. No one tells you how hard it is to rebuild after something like this. No one tells you that starting over means leaving so much behind. But it also means giving yourself a chance to grow. To heal. I don't know what the future holds, whether I'll adopt, whether I'll fall in love again, or whether I'll ever truly feel whole again. But for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to believe that it's possible. That maybe, just maybe, I can make a family of my own, built on trust and love, without betrayal and heartbreak at its core. And that, for now, is enough.